The evening was quiet, almost peaceful. The streets were empty except for a few cars moving slowly, their headlights cutting through the dim glow of the street lamps. The federal judge had just finished a long day at the courthouse, a day filled with back-to-back hearings and complex cases that demanded sharp attention. It was the kind of day that leaves a person drained both mentally and physically, yet there was a sense of fulfillment in the work completed. The judge's car rolled along the familiar route home, the city lights reflecting on the windshield, creating fleeting patterns that danced across the dashboard. Without any warning, flashing red and blue lights appeared in the rearview mirror. The judge instinctively pulled over to the side of the road, heart rate quickening, mind trying to understand why a routine drive home had suddenly turned tense. The officers who approached the car carried a presence that immediately felt different. Their movements were sharp, their eyes scanning the vehicle with a caution that seemed disproportionate to the situation. The judge rolled down the window, keeping hands visible, a gesture of calm and compliance. The first officer spoke with a tone that was more accusatory than polite. "Do you know why we stopped you?" he asked, though his eyes barely met the judge's. The words felt heavy, almost loaded, carrying a suspicion that seemed rooted in more than just a traffic stop. The judge replied calmly, stating the route and reason for being on that road at that hour. There was no sign of hostility in the judge's voice, only a careful attempt to explain and cooperate. The officers, however, did not seem satisfied. One officer leaned closer to the car, peering inside, asking questions that felt personal, probing, and unnecessary. The judge's calm demeanor did not falter, but there was an unmistakable tension in the air. The questions did not relate to any traffic violation. Instead, they seemed aimed at examining the judge as a person, scrutinizing without cause, as if assuming guilt without reason. Time seemed to stretch as the conversation continued. The judge noticed the subtle ways the officers behaved differently than they would with other drivers. The quick, dismissive gestures, the sharp tone that cut through the quiet night, the way they exchanged looks that seemed to communicate disbelief or suspicion without explanation. The judge kept hands on the wheel, eyes steady, carefully listening to each word while formulating answers that were truthful but cautious, aware that any misstep could escalate the situation further. The night air was cold, yet the judge felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. There was an awareness, a recognition that the stop was not ordinary. Other cars passed by slowly, some drivers glancing at the scene, unaware of the layers of tension present in those few minutes. The judge's mind raced through possible reasons for the stop, yet none fit. Every instinct told that this was different from any other encounter with law enforcement. Meanwhile, a neighbor across the street noticed the interaction and stepped out briefly to see if everything was all right. From that distance, the tension was palpable. The officer's posture was rigid, and the judge remained composed, though the concern in their eyes betrayed the internal stress. The neighbor returned inside, quietly recording the scene with a phone, sensing that this interaction might be more than a routine stop. Inside the car, the judge maintained a calm exterior, yet inside emotions swirled. Frustration, confusion, and a deep sense of unfairness mixed together. The judge had sworn an oath to uphold the law, to be impartial and just, yet here was an encounter that seemed to defy all logic and fairness. The irony was not lost, and the feeling of helplessness added weight to each passing second. The officers asked for the judge's identification and vehicle documents. These were provided promptly, with the judge maintaining politeness despite the growing unease. Every movement was careful, every word deliberate. The judge noticed the officers whispering to each other, their words not fully audible, but the body language spoke volumes. There was a scrutiny in their stance that suggested bias, a presumption of wrongdoing based solely on appearance rather than action. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. The judge's mind wandered briefly to thoughts of the courthouse, of colleagues who would be shocked if they knew about this moment. The judge's role demanded respect, yet here was a situation where authority seemed questioned, not because of action, but because of identity. The disparity between expectation and reality created a tension that was hard to ignore. Then, without warning, one officer stepped closer to the vehicle and asked a question that had no clear purpose other than to unsettle. The judge answered calmly, yet the officer's expression remained unreadable, a mixture of suspicion and disbelief. It became clear that the officers were not acting out of protocol, but from an underlying bias that had nothing to do with the law. The judge recognized this, a sinking feeling forming that this stop was not just about traffic rules but about prejudice manifesting in real time. Throughout the encounter, the judge remained composed, refusing to mirror the aggression or suspicion. Every response was measured, every gesture controlled. Inside, though, the heart raced, adrenaline surged, and thoughts of self-protection and legal recourse formed in tandem. The judge knew that preserving composure was essential, both for personal safety and as a testament to the integrity of their position. The scene carried on with subtle shifts in tone, a mixture of questioning, observation, and minor commands. The judge's car lights reflected off the officers' badges in the nearby houses, creating a surreal mix of light and shadow. Each moment felt stretched, heavy with unspoken implications. The officers seemed determined to prolong the encounter, as if searching for justification where none existed. The judge's patience, however, remained firm, grounded in experience and a deep understanding of justice and restraint. In the background, the neighbor continued recording discreetly, capturing moments that would later provide clarity. The footage showed the calm demeanor of the judge contrasted sharply with the escalating tension of the officers. It was a visual record of bias in action, a silent witness to an event that could have gone unnoticed without careful attention. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the officers allowed the judge to leave, but not without a few parting remarks that carried a tone of suspicion disguised as advice. The judge nodded politely, maintaining composure while silently counting the minutes until safety and normalcy returned. Once the car merged back into the flow of traffic, a heavy exhale signaled the release of tension, though the impact of the encounter lingered. Driving the remaining distance home, the judge reflected on the incident. Questions swirled. Why had this happened? What had prompted such treatment? The answers were not immediately clear, but a sense of injustice was undeniable. The judge knew that this encounter was not just personal, but a symptom of larger issues that demanded attention. It was a moment that highlighted vulnerability, bias, and the importance of accountability. Arriving home, the judge stepped out of the car and locked the doors, a small but significant gesture of reclaiming safety. The evening that began with quiet peace had transformed into a confrontation that challenged the very principles the judge upheld. While physically unharmed, the emotional weight was palpable, a reminder that bias and prejudice could surface anywhere, even against those tasked with upholding the law. The judge took a moment to gather thoughts, recognizing the need to document every detail. Notes would be made, complaints filed, and the proper authorities informed. This was not an ordinary stop, and the response had to reflect the seriousness of the situation. The encounter was a catalyst, a starting point for accountability, and a story that demanded to be told. In the quiet of the home, the judge reflected on the paradox of the situation. One who represents law and justice, now subjected to bias and undue suspicion. The evening's events were a stark reminder that injustice can touch anyone, regardless of position or authority. Yet amidst the frustration and disappointment there was resolve. The judge knew that the right response was not anger or retaliation, but measured action, documenting the truth, and seeking accountability through legal and proper channels. The first step had been endured, the biased stop. The path forward would involve reporting, investigation, and ultimately the pursuit of justice. But in this moment, the focus was on understanding, reflecting, and preparing to act. The night, though tense and unsettling, had tested composure, patience, and resolve. And the judge, despite the unfair treatment, had met the challenge with dignity, setting the stage for the fight for accountability that was just beginning. The morning after the stop, the federal judge awoke with a lingering sense of unease. The memory of the officers' faces, their dismissive glances, and the way they had scrutinized every word weighed heavily. It was more than just a traffic stop. It felt like a message, a reminder that bias could surface in the most unexpected places. Even after a good night's sleep, the tension remained, a quiet storm of thoughts and emotions. The judge prepared for the day with careful attention, dressing neatly and moving through the morning routine methodically. There was work to be done, cases to review, and a courtroom waiting for the judge's presence. Yet each movement carried the shadow of the previous night. The simple act of opening the door to leave the house brought a cautious glance at the street. a quiet reflection on how ordinary routines could suddenly feel uncertain. As the judge arrived at the courthouse, colleagues greeted with smiles and nods, unaware of the full extent of the incident. The judge moved through the halls with professional calm, yet internally, a determination grew. This was not a time to retreat or hide. It was a moment to address the injustice, to confront it through proper channels, and to ensure that the experience would not be ignored. The judge knew that the law was a shield, and this time it needed to be wielded for accountability. During the morning briefing, the judge shared a brief summary of the stop with a few trusted colleagues. Their reactions were immediate, ranging from shock to disbelief. Conversations buzzed quietly, the news spreading through whispers and cautious comments. Many were stunned that someone in such a respected position could be subjected to biased treatment in plain sight. Questions arose: how could this happen? Why would law enforcement behave this way? The answers were not simple, but the event had created a ripple effect, drawing attention from those who valued fairness and justice. The judge took notes, carefully documenting every detail from the night before: the time, the location, the words exchanged, the body language of the officers, and even the subtle gestures that conveyed suspicion or bias. Each observation was recorded meticulously, knowing that clarity and precision would be critical in any formal complaint or investigation. It was a painstaking process, but the judge understood its importance. Accuracy was a form of protection, a way to ensure the truth was preserved. By mid-morning, the judge decided to contact the Federal Oversight Office responsible for law enforcement conduct. The call was deliberate and measured. Every word was chosen carefully, the description factual and free from emotional embellishment. The judge spoke of the stop, of the officer's behavior, and the disproportionate suspicion directed at someone simply following the law. The person on the other end listened attentively, noting each detail, understanding that this was not a routine complaint. This was a federal matter, a concern that required immediate attention due to the position of the person involved and the apparent bias displayed. Meanwhile, the media had begun to catch wind of the incident. A local reporter had received a tip from a neighbor who had recorded part of the encounter. The footage was clear. The officer's behavior contrasted sharply with the calm and composed demeanor of the judge. News outlets began to prepare stories, careful to verify facts before publication. The judge was not seeking publicity, but the public interest was inevitable. When those entrusted with upholding the law behave unjustly, it becomes a matter that affects the entire community. As the story spread, reactions poured in from the public. Some expressed outrage, calling for immediate accountability. Others shared their own experiences with bias, resonating with the judge's experience. The judge read the messages cautiously, recognizing both support and the responsibility that came with public attention. There was a sense of solidarity, yet also a reminder that the journey toward justice was not simple or immediate. The incident had opened a conversation that had been long overdue, shining a light on issues that were often hidden behind closed doors. Back at the courthouse, the judge continued with the day's work, presiding over cases with focus and precision, yet each interaction carried a subtle weight. The judge's attention to detail was sharper, the awareness of fairness more pronounced. Conversations with attorneys, litigants, and colleagues were approached with careful consideration. Every ruling, every word spoken became a reaffirmation of the principles that had been momentarily challenged the night before. The judge understood that maintaining integrity in the face of personal experience was essential. During lunch, the judge met quietly with a trusted mentor, someone who had navigated the judiciary for decades. The conversation was candid, exploring both personal impact and broader implications. The mentor emphasized the importance of measured action, filing complaints, documenting facts, and ensuring the proper channels were engaged. Emotional reactions were natural, but they needed to be balanced with strategy and legal precision. The judge listened carefully, appreciating the guidance and the reminder that personal experience could be transformed into a force for systemic change. In the afternoon, the judge reviewed the recordings from the neighbor, analyzing the details with careful attention. Every movement of the officers, every inflection in their voices, and every gesture was noted. The footage provided a clear contrast between the judge's professionalism and the officer's bias. This visual record would be critical in any investigation, a tangible representation of the encounter that could not be dismissed or misrepresented. The judge understood the power of evidence and the responsibility that came with it. Word of the incident reached community leaders, civil rights organizations, and advocacy groups. They began reaching out, offering support and guidance. Letters, calls, and messages emphasized the seriousness of the situation and the importance of holding those responsible accountable. The judge appreciated the outreach, but remained focused on ensuring that actions were taken through proper legal procedures. Advocacy could support, but justice required formal process. As the day drew to a close, the judge reflected on the impact of the incident. What had started as a routine drive home had become a catalyst for discussion, reflection, and action. The stop had revealed vulnerabilities, biases, and systemic issues, yet it had also sparked determination, resilience, and a commitment to accountability. The judge recognized that this was not only a personal challenge but an opportunity to address broader problems within law enforcement practices. The evening brought a quiet sense of resolve. The judge prepared a formal written account of the incident, ensuring every detail was captured accurately. The document would serve as the foundation for the complaint to federal authorities, a clear and concise narrative that left no room for doubt. Each sentence was carefully constructed, reflecting truth and professionalism, and avoiding any unnecessary embellishment. It was a methodical process, a deliberate act of preparation for the steps that lay ahead. The community's response continued to grow, with small gatherings and online discussions emphasizing the need for change. While the judge remained private about personal feelings, the awareness of public interest added urgency to the next steps. It was a reminder that individual experiences, when documented and shared responsibly, could influence broader discussions on fairness, accountability, and justice. By nightfall, the judge sat quietly at home, reviewing notes and preparing for the official filing. The memory of the officer's behavior was still fresh, but it was now tempered by purpose. Each recollection was a reminder of why careful action mattered. The judge had faced an unjust situation, but now had the tools, knowledge, and support to ensure that it would be addressed appropriately. The day ended with a sense of cautious optimism. The judge understood that the process would take time, that investigations, hearings, and reviews were necessary steps to ensure accountability. Yet there was also a feeling of empowerment, a recognition that maintaining composure, documenting facts, and seeking justice were powerful tools. The incident, while unsettling, had ignited a commitment to fairness, transparency, and the principle that no one, not even a federal judge, should be subjected to unjust treatment. The events of that day marked the beginning of a larger journey. It was a path that would test patience, demand resilience, and require unwavering commitment to truth and justice. Yet the judge faced it with determination, understanding that every careful step taken would contribute not only to personal resolution, but also to a broader message. That bias, when confronted with evidence and accountability, could not prevail. The day closed with quiet reflection, a sense of purpose and readiness for the steps that lay ahead. The federal investigation began quietly but swiftly. Within hours of the judge filing the official complaint, a team of investigators was assigned to the case. Their first steps were methodical. They reviewed the recorded footage from the neighbor, examined the notes provided by the judge, and began contacting witnesses who might have seen the interaction. The team understood the sensitivity of the situation. A federal judge had been targeted, and every action needed to be thorough and precise. The judge, aware of the investigation, felt a mix of relief and continued unease. Relief because the system was responding quickly. Unease because the officer's bias had been so blatant. Sitting in chambers, the judge thought about the officers' mannerisms, their questions, and the way they had assumed wrongdoing without cause. Those memories were not just about fear. They were about the breach of trust that occurs when those sworn to protect act unfairly. Investigators began by interviewing the officers involved. Each officer was asked to recount the events, to explain their actions and decisions. The interviews were tense and the officers were cautious, aware that their conduct was under scrutiny. Their statements were compared with the video evidence and the judge's detailed account. Discrepancies were noted, and patterns of behavior from past incidents were reviewed to see if bias was a recurring issue. Meanwhile, the judge continued with daily work. balancing the investigation's progress with the responsibilities of the courtroom. It was not easy. Every case, every decision, carried the added awareness of recent events. Yet the judge remained committed to impartiality, demonstrating the very principles that had been challenged. The courtroom became a space where professionalism and integrity were reaffirmed, not just for the judge, but for the public and colleagues watching closely. Community members who had learned of the incident continued to offer support. Local organizations sent letters expressing concern, emphasizing that bias against anyone, especially a figure of justice, was unacceptable. These messages were shared with the judge, who appreciated the solidarity but also focused on letting the investigation proceed without interference. The judge understood that advocacy was powerful, but the law required patience and adherence to procedure. During the investigation, investigators requested additional footage from nearby traffic cameras. Every angle was scrutinized, every second of video analyzed to confirm what had occurred. The goal was clear: to provide a complete and unbiased view of the event. Each investigator approached the task with care, knowing that the integrity of their work would directly influence the outcome. The footage reinforced what the judge had experienced. The officer's behavior had been aggressive and unwarranted. In addition to interviews and video evidence, investigators reviewed the officer's histories. Past complaints, disciplinary records, and performance reviews were examined. Patterns emerged. The investigation team discovered previous instances where bias had influenced interactions with the public. These findings painted a broader picture of systemic issues, highlighting the importance of addressing not only this incident, but also the underlying practices that allowed such behavior to occur. The judge, though personally affected, remained calm and measured. In conversations with close colleagues and mentors, the judge emphasized the importance of letting the legal process guide the outcome. Emotional responses were natural, but they could not replace factual evidence. Patience, persistence, and documentation were essential. The judge maintained daily routines as much as possible, ensuring that the investigation did not overshadow the responsibility to the public and the law. As the investigation progressed, tension increased. The officers' accounts were inconsistent, and the evidence showed clear signs of bias. Investigators faced the challenge of presenting findings in a way that was factual and compelling, avoiding assumptions or exaggeration. Each detail mattered: the tone of voice, the timing of questions, the physical gestures. These subtle elements provided insight into intent, revealing the officer's prejudices without needing interpretation beyond the observable facts. The judge received periodic updates from the investigation team. Each update offered reassurance that the process was moving forward and that the facts were being taken seriously. The judge also understood that these updates were part of a larger system designed to ensure fairness. There was a growing sense of cautious optimism, knowing that accountability was not only possible, but likely if the evidence continued to support the complaint. During this period, the judge reflected on the broader implications. The incident was not isolated. It was a symptom of a larger problem within law enforcement. Recognizing this did not diminish the personal impact, but it provided perspective. By participating in the investigation and providing clear, detailed evidence, the judge could help initiate change that extended beyond the immediate situation. This awareness strengthened resolve and reinforced the importance of patience and precision. Community interest remained high. Local leaders, advocacy groups, and concerned citizens continued to follow the progress quietly, respecting the need for an official process. Conversations about systemic reform began to emerge, linking this incident to ongoing discussions about fairness, equality, and accountability. The judge observed these developments with a sense of responsibility, understanding that public discourse could influence reform, but must remain rooted in truth. Investigators scheduled formal interviews with witnesses who had been present in nearby areas. Each witness provided their observations: the demeanor of the officers, the calm behavior of the judge, and the overall tension in the encounter. These first-hand accounts corroborated the judge's version of events, strengthening the case and providing additional evidence of bias. The investigation team meticulously documented each statement, cross-referencing them with recorded footage and notes. As the investigation continued, Internal discussions within the police department became more urgent. Supervisors reviewed the conduct of the officers, acknowledging the seriousness of targeting a federal judge. Meetings focused on policy, accountability, and potential disciplinary actions. The department recognized that public trust and confidence were at stake, especially when the incident had gained attention beyond the local level. The judge maintained focus on professional duties, balancing courtroom responsibilities with the emotional weight of being at the center of a high-profile investigation. Each day brought new challenges, yet the judge's resolve remained strong. There was a clear understanding that personal composure and adherence to procedure were critical, not only for the investigation but also for setting an example of integrity and resilience. As more evidence was collected, patterns of bias in the officers' behavior became undeniable. The investigation team prepared a preliminary report outlining findings, emphasizing factual observations, and documenting inconsistencies in officer accounts. The report highlighted the judge's professionalism contrasted with the officer's prejudiced behavior. This document would serve as a foundation for any further legal or disciplinary action. Through it all, the judge reflected on the importance of the process. Patience, diligence, and accuracy were essential. The investigation was not about revenge or retribution. It was about ensuring that those entrusted with authority acted responsibly and without prejudice. The judge understood that every piece of evidence, every witness statement, and every procedural step contributed to the broader goal of accountability and justice. As the investigation entered its next phase, the judge prepared to provide testimony if required. Careful planning and review of notes ensured that every detail could be communicated clearly and calmly. The judge remained committed to presenting the facts objectively, demonstrating both credibility and composure. This preparation was not only for the investigation, but also as a reflection of the principles that guided the judge's work every day. By the end of the week, the investigation had gathered substantial evidence. Video footage, witness statements, and historical records painted a comprehensive picture of the encounter. Investigators were confident that the findings supported the complaint and highlighted a serious breach of conduct. For the judge, this progress brought a mix of relief and anticipation. Relief that the truth was being acknowledged, anticipation for the next steps that would lead toward accountability. The day concluded with the judge reviewing the documentation one last time. Each note, each recording, and each statement served as a reminder of the importance of accuracy, patience, and resilience. The investigation had moved forward significantly, and the foundation for justice was being laid carefully and deliberately. The judge knew that the journey was far from over, but the steps taken so far demonstrated that fairness, when combined with perseverance and evidence, could prevail. Evening settled over the city, and the judge sat quietly, reflecting on the events of the past days. The officer's bias, the public attention, and the federal investigation had created a unique and challenging experience. Yet amidst the tension and uncertainty there was clarity. The pursuit of justice required calm, careful action, and unwavering commitment to truth. The investigation was more than a response to a personal experience. It was an opportunity to reinforce accountability and uphold the principles that guided every decision in the courtroom. The night ended with quiet determination. The judge knew that the investigation was a pivotal moment, one that would test patience and resilience. But with careful documentation, measured action, and support from the investigation team, there was a sense of confidence that the outcome would reflect fairness and integrity. The encounter that had begun as a troubling stop had now evolved into a critical process of accountability, scrutiny, and the potential for meaningful change within law enforcement practices. The findings of the federal investigation had reached a critical stage. Evidence from video footage, witness accounts, and documentation provided by the judge left little doubt about the officer's misconduct. The report concluded that the stop was influenced by bias rather than any legitimate cause. The conclusion was clear, and the consequences for the officers involved became the next focus. The judge, while relieved that the truth was recognized, understood that this was only one step in a longer process. The officers had been placed on immediate suspension, a procedural move that protected both the investigation's integrity and the safety of the public. While the suspension did not resolve everything, it sent a clear message that misconduct, especially when it targeted someone upholding the law, would not be ignored. Inside the police department, discussions were tense. Supervisors reviewed the case in detail, weighing disciplinary actions against procedural regulations. Meetings were held to determine the appropriate consequences, ranging from retraining programs to potential termination. Each decision carried weight, not just for the officers involved, but for the department's reputation and community trust. The realization that a federal judge had been targeted had amplified the urgency to act decisively. The judge continued daily routines at the courthouse, balancing the stress of the investigation with professional duties. Presiding over cases required focus and clarity, and despite the weight of recent events, the judge maintained a calm and composed demeanor. Each ruling, each interaction reflected the principles of fairness and integrity. Maintaining this professionalism was crucial, not just for personal credibility, but for reinforcing public confidence in the judicial system. Meanwhile, civil rights organizations and advocacy groups had begun to take a more active interest. They offered guidance to the judge on navigating the disciplinary process and provided insight into systemic issues within law enforcement. Letters and calls emphasized that while the personal experience was significant, the broader implications were equally important. By holding officers accountable, the incident could serve as a catalyst for policy review and reform. The judge appreciated the support, but remained focused on ensuring that the legal process was followed correctly. As disciplinary hearings commenced, the officers were required to respond to the findings. Their statements were scrutinized alongside the video footage, witness testimony, and the detailed report from the federal investigation. The contrast between their accounts and the documented evidence was stark. Inconsistencies in their statements revealed attempts to downplay the bias observed during the stop. The hearings were intense, but they were conducted in a structured, fair manner to ensure procedural integrity. The judge followed the hearings with measured attention. While not directly involved, the judge remained updated through legal counsel and oversight authorities. Each development reinforced the importance of patience, precision, and adherence to the process. The goal was not personal vindication, but accountability for actions that undermined public trust and threatened the principles of justice. Observing the proceedings, the judge noted both the progress and the systemic challenges that allowed such bias to surface. During this time, public interest remained high. Community members followed news reports closely, discussing the developments in local forums and gatherings. The story had become more than an individual incident. It had sparked a conversation about fairness, equality, and accountability within law enforcement. The judge recognized that public engagement could support reform efforts, but also understood the importance of maintaining professional detachment from media attention to preserve the integrity of ongoing proceedings. As hearings progressed, the disciplinary panel considered multiple factors: the officer's history, the severity of the misconduct, and the potential impact on public trust all influenced decisions. Retraining programs were proposed, focusing on bias awareness, communication, and adherence to procedural guidelines. In more severe cases, termination was considered appropriate to protect community safety and uphold departmental standards. Each step reflected a careful balance between accountability, rehabilitation, and procedural fairness. The judge, reflecting on these developments, considered the broader lessons from the incident. Bias, when unchecked, could undermine the very foundation of law enforcement and judicial authority. Yet accountability systems existed to correct such failures, emphasizing that even individuals in positions of power were not above scrutiny. The judge's experience highlighted both the vulnerabilities in the system and the mechanisms in place to address wrongdoing. Throughout this period, the judge maintained regular communication with colleagues and mentors. Discussions focused on strategy, professional conduct, and the potential implications for future cases. Emotional support was essential, helping the judge navigate the stress and uncertainty of the situation. While the experience had been unsettling, it reinforced the judge's commitment to upholding justice and serving as a model of composure and integrity under pressure. The community continued to watch developments closely. Advocacy groups emphasized the importance of transparency and encouraged dialogue on systemic reform. The judge's measured approach served as a reminder of the value of patience, professionalism, and the careful documentation of facts. Public discourse began to expand beyond the immediate incident, discussing broader reforms, training improvements, and accountability measures to prevent similar events in the future. By midweek, the disciplinary outcomes became clearer. One officer received termination for repeated misconduct and failure to adhere to departmental guidelines. Others faced retraining and probation, reflecting the varying degrees of involvement and prior history. The judge, informed of these decisions, acknowledged the significance of the actions taken. While not all outcomes were identical, the accountability measures represented a critical step in restoring trust and reinforcing standards of conduct. The judge also considered the personal impact of these outcomes. Seeing evidence and witnesses recognized and understanding that actions were being addressed brought a sense of validation, yet the experience remained a reminder of the ever-present need for vigilance against bias. The judge's reflections emphasized that personal composure and professionalism were tools not just for the courtroom, but also for navigating unexpected challenges with dignity. In the days following the disciplinary actions, the judge participated in discussions about potential reforms and policy reviews. Insights from the investigation were shared with internal committees and advisory groups focused on improving law enforcement practices. The judge's experience became part of a larger conversation about procedural fairness, bias prevention, and the importance of accountability at all levels of authority. Community feedback remained supportive. Messages and communications emphasized the importance of the judge's approach, calm, measured, and evidence-based. These reactions reinforced the broader impact of the incident, highlighting how individual experiences could influence systemic change. The judge recognized that while personal experience was central, the focus remained on collective lessons and long-term improvements. By the end of the week, the judge had a clear sense of closure regarding the immediate accountability process. The officers had faced consequences proportional to their actions, and the investigation had reinforced the importance of fairness, transparency, and professional conduct. While the personal experience remained significant, the judge felt a renewed sense of purpose, understanding that the episode had contributed to broader awareness and reform. Evenings settled over the city, and the judge sat quietly in chambers, reflecting on the journey from the night of the stop to the present resolution. The experience had tested patience, resilience, and composure. It had also reaffirmed the power of methodical action, evidence, and adherence to proper procedure. The officer's accountability marked a meaningful outcome, signaling that bias and misconduct could not go unchecked when confronted with clarity and diligence. The judge knew that the work did not end with disciplinary actions. Ongoing reflection, policy review, and support for reform initiatives were essential. The incident had become a catalyst, sparking conversations and attention that could lead to meaningful improvements in law enforcement practices. By remaining composed, professional, and committed to truth, the judge had set an example of integrity that extended beyond personal experience to broader societal impact. As the night deepened, the judge felt a quiet sense of resolve. The officers had been held accountable, the investigation had been thorough, and the principles of fairness had guided every step. Yet the judge remained aware that vigilance and commitment to justice were ongoing responsibilities. The events had been challenging, but they had also demonstrated that accountability, when pursued diligently and ethically, could lead to meaningful change. The judge closed the day with a renewed focus on the work ahead, knowing that each careful action contributed to a stronger, fairer system for all. After the disciplinary actions were announced, the judge felt a mixture of relief and reflection, relief that the officers had been held accountable, and reflection on the events that had brought such attention to a problem that too often went unnoticed. The night that had started with a routine drive had become a moment that highlighted the need for fairness, integrity, and vigilance at every level of authority.